good God, you're all thinking, he wants to put sensors in my underpants. Actually, not quite. So, I'm going to try and make a particular connection. The perspective I want to take is, there is awesome work being done in this space, but a bunch of you are probably here because you want to do your own awesome work in this space. And the question is, what are the things that you should be focused on if you're actually trying to make change happen? So collecting more underpants, collecting more intelligence, or collecting more health data does not, in and of itself, ensure health results. So, you know, our nodes. Phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, not entirely sure. Phase 3, profit. My take on the NSA at the moment. Collect the intelligence. Somehow or other, we're going to catch terrorists. A bit in the middle, not entirely clear that they have a way of making that connection. Quantified self movement in general. Collect a lot of health data. In some cases, we're going to improve the health outcome. But the big problem, we think, actually sort of lies in the middle. If you're going to try and actually make this happen, there's a set of things that we think are really important to do. First of all, you've actually got to understand the ecosystem and the value. If you're well established in particular niches of it, if you hold the highest of high grounds, if you are the temple on the hill, MGH, and Raymond Women's, to whom everybody else looks up, then you're certainly advantaged. If you're a media lab, you have an extraordinarily strong position from which to go up. But given that, the second thing you've got to do is then think about your product, the data, and how does that line up with all of the very complex pattern incentives? Because that's the big issue. This is a very complex ecosystem. At last, you've got to create value to the relevant parties in the ecosystem. So, we think the big winners in this space, the people who both actually make change happen and actually build successful organizations of it, make money out of it, are going to do three things. The first problem we've got is we've got convergent technology. I know it seems like a big problem at the moment to capture the data, but we're at the point, if you look ahead just a little bit, it's very rapidly converging. Play this out over 2 or 3 years and we'll go, well, what was the problem here? Because it's being solved. In essence, the trackable biomarkers and activities that you can track in a non-invasive way or minimally invasive way are pretty fundamentally limited. My working hypothesis at the moment, based not least upon a conversation earlier this evening, is for every single one of them, there is at least one MIT spin-out currently living somewhere in Cambridge Innovation Centre. In fact, at the moment, I'm pretty much convinced there's 2 for most of the major biomarkers, because at least to my knowledge, I think I've got 2. I see smiles in the front row who would probably agree. For every single biomarker, there are at least 2 MIT spin-outs in Cambridge Innovation Centre somewhere at the moment. They don't all know each other yet. They keep bumping into the elevator. I met a new one tonight. But this is a non-problem. Sorry. It's very soon a non-problem. Point 2. Wearables, and we've been tracking this, we've been working in this space for a while, are basically evolving towards a dominant design. If you're not basically doing it for the Bluetooth/low energy connected through Android and iOS, abandon your current design and re-architect it. Right? There's your, if for nothing else, if you've got any other architecture, stop now and do it differently. 3. In parallel with this, what we have, however, is the economic landscape is actually changing very significantly. So the technology is converging, but the economic landscape is changing dramatically. We've got a very big shift going on in terms of the economic incentives. Novel incentives in terms of pay for performance, accountable care organisation, budgetable payments and so on, and providers, payers, and other players all worrying about how they survive in this new world. What are their incentives? What are their payoffs? How do you go do it? A very significant shift taking that place. That's actually the big problem. In parallel to that, we're basically seeing 2 things going on. There's a bunch of top-down pressure and actually bottom-up demand. So consumers are demanding increased health and wellness, but the people who actually need quantification are the very people who are least likely to adopt this new technology. I have one important piece of advice about this. I'm not going to name her name, but I had a terrifying conversation this evening from somebody from a healthcare company who said, oh yes, there's about 15 of us, yes, they're in Cambridge Innovation Centre, the scary prospect is I'm the only person in the firm who has any sort of a business focus. 14 technologists, one business person. The problem is not the technology. This is a business incentives ecosystem alignment problem. So, just to drive home this point, there's a pretty limited set of quantifiable health and fitness information. If you think you're going to build a business because you've got a better technology and you're going to capture risk real estate and all the rest because you measure one particular biomarker, abandon your current business plan and come up with a new one, right? Because they may be aggregating and correlating a whole variety of things. Value is actually created by motivating patients to use devices, by generating novel insights about the patient, and by direction which is grounded in economics and in outcomes. Why economics? Well, we can be as altruistic as we like, but if this is not to some extent grounded in economics, you're not going to be able to find people to pay for it. Tragic, but important. Now, in some other countries, outcomes can be deemed in single provider pay systems to connect very directly. So under the UK NICE regimes, or some of the French and New Zealand regimes, they will actually take account of outcomes. At the societal level, when they're thinking about the funding they provide for the health system in general and to technological innovations. Not true in this country, right? Unless you've managed to find somebody who has enormous philanthropic innovation, or you've got Bill Gates' phone number. So, the challenge that we face, if you're thinking about this ecosystem, is the actual interworking of getting data from the point of creation to the point of action is very obtuse and complex, right? We're seeing a lot of very narrow point solutions. If you actually want to think about how the system works, I've got to collect clinical and non-clinical data, because a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense without the contextual information. I've got to transfer it, I've got to store it, I've got to be rated compliant, I've got to run a bunch of analytics on it. This is not a simple puzzle. In this sense, although the underlying technology is at the sort of the rapidly converging, we're very much at the pre-paradigmatic stage in terms of how you coordinate what goes on in the system. We're at the earliest possible stages about how these pieces of the puzzle get solved and come together. And at the end of the day, as I spent a lot of my time over the last several weeks talking to people about how much you actually know about the behavioral science, about what it is that triggers behavior. It's ironic, we're solving this problem, and this is the bloody problem here. It's actually getting people to change their behavior at the end of the day. And the relative weighting going on at the left-hand end of the day, particularly in this city, particularly given Harvard and MIT, and particularly given our heritage, is overwhelmingly about collecting bloody underpants, not about achieving a stage 3 outcome. This is problem 2, and there's a bloody great question mark right in the middle of it. Just to pick up on that point, pretty much everybody in this room, by the mere fact that you've self-selected to be in this room, have rendered yourselves incapable of objective commentary on the process of adoption. Let me think. It's, despite being bribed by alcohol, it's 7:26 on a gorgeous summer evening in Massachusetts, and we're in a conference center listening to me speak. Boy, you must want to flagellate yourself a lot if you want to go do this. Compared with all of the myriad things you do, think about your particular incentives, payoffs, and motivations, that this is what you choose to do at 7:30 on a gorgeous summer evening. There's something seriously wrong with everybody here. We're right down here at this level. We're the people who least need, well, actually, we're the people who, on the whole, least need this stuff. The problem is over here. It's analogs, people who did not grow up in the age of digital technology and have not come to understand the concepts and the value. I was looking at the new Pew research, which came out yesterday, on the uptake of the internet. And if you go back 2 cycles, 30% of the population didn't have the internet, and most of them said they didn't have it because they weren't interested. A third of them now have it. Why? Well, they didn't know that they really needed it. That's where we are with this, even more so. Because the number isn't 30%, it's 95%. The 95% of that right-hand group who need it, neither know about it, don't think they need it, and don't care. So, what should you be doing if you both want to make money and have an impact? Crassly, I believe they're highly correlated. Because if you want funding, if you want people lined up beside you, yes, the intrinsic motivation is incredibly important, but actually the intrinsic motivation, some of us need to pay the mortgage, do those sorts of things become incredibly important. Conversation with an entrepreneur in this space who's actually one of the founders of one of the smart startups in this space, who we're doing some work with, and as he's saying, hey, you know what, I have a new girlfriend. I would really want to actually be able to rent a place and pay a mortgage, right? I'm now in my early 30s, and that changes it. So what are the key incentives for each of the players in the ecosystem? How will they involve patients and providers, which is actually a whole set of sub-communities in of itself. I see Joe nodding essentially here because the economic, I'll be completely candid, the economic incentives of my insurance company don't necessarily line up 100% with MGH's economic incentives. Not quite 100%. What ultimately, this I think is the big question, the right-hand side of it. What ultimately motivates and changes patient behavior for the better? And given that, what are we going to do to create, capture, and sustain value in that ecosystem? Thank you.